Hello, I'm Ben Wattenberg. Until recently, it was said that America's big problem is jobs, jobs, jobs. Now, another question is surfacing. What happens when there are more jobs than workers? The topics before this House. Will there be a labor shortage? And is that the good news or the bad news? This week on Think Tank. So will America have too few jobs or too few workers? In a few moments, leading scholars will discuss the changing face of the American workforce. But first, some background. In the early 1980s, at the depth of the worst recession in recent history, American business was struggling. 15 years ago, I visited the so-called Rust Belt, the heartland of American manufacturing. Unemployment in some areas was running rampant, near depression levels. Factories were shutting their doors. Jobs were scarce.
Nobody's working. A lot of people are unemployed. People used to come to the market, and then they go to Sattlers, then they go to Kobackers. They could go for shoes, they could go for jewelry. It's all gone.
But today, the Rust Belt is rusty no longer. All over America, businesses shifted gears, retooled, and are now thriving.
But in the last decade, there have been dramatic changes with American companies as they've played in this global economy, and especially as they've set up their operations and improved their operations here in the United States. So although there's some downsizing and displacement, restructuring, what I think we would see in sector after sector in American industry is a very healthy and robust set of companies.
Think Tank recently visited Indianapolis, Indiana, for a case study of the American workforce. Business is booming here at Allison Transmission, a major manufacturing plant with nearly 4,000 employees on the outskirts of Indianapolis.
Our prospects and our potential is much greater, say, than it's been over the last 8 or 10 years. We're understanding that we have to compete in a global marketplace, and we have potential for new markets outside of the United States, which will help us grow both domestically and internationally.
All of this may sound like a happy dream sequence, but business is so heated up here in the Indianapolis area, there are often not enough workers for all of the jobs. Let's talk now about the economy of Indianapolis, Indiana. What is the unemployment rate now in Indianapolis?
It's about 2.7%.
That's the city or the metro?
That's the city. The metro area is about a half point lower than that. It's lower than it can possibly get. We have a serious labor shortage, even in the city itself.
Is a labor shortage good or bad?
Both. The rate of growth in our economy will begin to slow because of the absence of labor. The cost of labor goes up with a shortage, which is good if you're working and not so good if you're an employer.
Or a consumer, in fact.
Or a consumer.
Because it's passed on that sooner or later.
So it depends where you are, whether it's good or bad, but generally I think it's better than not. Now our employers are very concerned about the absence of available labor, and that is the number one issue. We also have a kind of a complicating factor, which every large city has, that in this 21st century knowledge-based economy, our urban workers, especially our young adults, may not be unemployed because they're no longer looking for work, but they're really not equipped at all to participate in the world economy, and it's going to be a serious problem as we move out. So we have simultaneously a labor shortage and a lot of people not working very much.
I have a problem with that. I keep hearing that we have to have a knowledge-based economy and everybody's got to get super educated, otherwise they can't compete in a global economy. Who are the janitors? Who are the chambermaids? Or going up the food chain, who are the bus drivers? There's a lot. Who are the gardeners? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Not everybody is going to be a computer engineer. You already have in many cities in America PhDs driving taxi cabs. Are we going to overeducate
the population, get everybody's hopes up, everybody goes to college, whole lots of people go to graduate school, and then we say, oh, by the way, what we are short of is taxi drivers.
Our urban children trapped in poorly performing center city school systems aren't getting to the 12th grade, don't know how to read, and can't even functionally operate a computer-driven manufacturing machine. Secondly, it's not just their absence of education, it's their absence of marketable character. I mean, we have a number of individuals who will not take the first step on the ladder of success, won't take the entry-level job because it's not good enough, doesn't pay enough because they're not committed to it enough. So I don't think our goal is to make every eighth grader a computer scientist or even a programmer, but to let them read and write and add and subtract well enough that they can operate a complicated machine in a factory, or they can do one of the other jobs, and that they have the commitment even to begin. Just for a second, in our expansion of our convention center in our arena, we will have people out in the neighborhoods knocking on the doors saying, would you please come out and work? We need you to work, and if you go to work as a maid in a hotel or a waiter or waitress in a restaurant, we'll arrange a career ladder, so if you work hard, you do a good job, then you can move up to the cook or the teller or the assistant general manager or whatever inside the system. And we're going to try to integrate these issues together.
What is the policy prescription for Indianapolis, for Metro Indianapolis, for Indiana, to try to get people attracted to here to take those jobs?
Well, I think there are several answers to that. Ultimately, it's the market will move labor around to match. You can look at it from the welfare reform side, which is we just made welfare less worse. We really haven't fixed the system yet. You can look at it in terms of national advertising and registering and national labor banks and encouraging companies to move people here. So it's really both of those things together, and eventually seeing if we can get it moving.
Is population growing?
Population is growing rapidly in the metro area, and it's now growing again in the city of Indianapolis itself. So we'll have labor and population growth. I think the interesting opportunity for city mayors is to figure out how you can turn a labor shortage into jobs for those who are really tuned out of the marketplace. Now, that won't solve the upper level jobs, which are going to have to be solved by recruiting people in and retaining a higher percentage of trained graduates. But at the bottom level, we just need to be a lot better about getting people into work.
A shortage of skilled workers is a problem felt right here at Allison.
In terms of the salaried area, we have done some selective hiring, and that's where the impact really feels probably the heaviest as we look for specific skills. So we're not able to find people in Indianapolis. We have to look on the outside.
This is not just an Indianapolis problem. It's national, and it may well intensify. The general population is aging. Baby boomers will start retiring from the labor force in very large numbers about a dozen years from now.
Probably in the next 10 to 15 years, well over half of both our salaried and hourly people could elect to retire. They would have more than 30 years of service, and that's sort of a key point at which they would consider. Our workforce is maturing, and there will come a time when we need to replace many of the people that currently work here today.
So we may be moving from an economy that needs jobs, jobs, jobs to one that needs workers, workers, workers. Economists have long struggled with questions of labor surplus and labor shortage. Joining think tank at the Indianapolis-based Hudson Institute to work through the issues and the implications are Professor Sheldon Danziger of the University of Michigan and co-author of the book America Unequal, and Richard Judy, Senior Research Fellow at the Hudson Institute and co-author of the Hudson Institute's report Workforce 2020, Work and Workers in the 21st Century.
Let me come down to sort of the nut question here, which is a labor shortage good or bad?
Well, a labor shortage is not a well-defined concept to an economist. We're both economists. And so what the market for labor is, we can expect it to clear in all likelihood. As Sheldon,
that's an economist term. What does that mean, to
that
clear?
means to say that the supply of work is likely to, if the macroeconomic picture is being managed well, and I argue once again that it is presently being managed well, then there's not likely to be much overall unemployment in the economy, nor is there likely to be a shortage, quote unquote, of workers either. Labor will be paid more probably. Wage rates may rise, but the supply will balance the demand. What happens is...
But if you have in Indianapolis a 2.5% unemployment rate,
right,
and 4.5% is frictional full employment, that's people who are quitting jobs voluntarily and looking for other jobs and things like that. There are still more jobs than there are workers.
But what we don't know, Ben, I think, is whether or not we've had a shift because of the globalization of the economy, that firms, at the same time unemployment is low, anyway are planning labor-saving technological change of the kind they've had. So I'm a firm. In 1982, I had a huge workforce. I laid them off. I began rebuilding, recovering. I'm now very efficient operating in the international economy. I've got a labor force. Do I hire more workers, or do I invest in some more labor-saving technology? And so I don't think it needs to lead to unemployment in the way because of the technological changes and the globalization.
Right. But of course,
if we were fixed in a more closed economy, then I think you'd be more worried about inflation when unemployment gets this low.
But when you invest in labor-saving technology, you're also creating jobs. You may be reducing the number of people on the plant floor to create a widget, but you're opening up another plant floor for capital goods. So,
that's right.
Sheldon, let me just follow up. Is a labor shortage good or bad?
It's much better than a labor surplus. I think certainly for any indicator of the U.S. economy, we're better off now than we were in 1982. Unemployment is lower, even though poverty is, I think, too high. Poverty is lower today than it was in 1982. Incomes on average are higher than they were in 1982. So I think given a choice, I'll always choose tight labor markets to high unemployment rates.
And I think there's no question that some companies are going to face a very serious shortage of workers as large portions of their employees, large numbers of their employees become eligible for retirement under their company plans. They're going to face the problem of replacing those workers very soon, shortly after the turn of the century. Some of the major companies we were talking about earlier on of durable goods manufacturing in this region have rapidly aging workforces, and will find that up to 90% of them will be eligible for retirement within the next 5 years. They face the problem of replacing those from pools of workers that are much fewer than earlier.
Okay, which leads us to the big I word that people don't like to discuss in this context, which is immigration. I mean, if you have a labor shortage, one way of solving it and dealing with it is immigration. On the other hand, then you don't have a labor shortage, and you've both said, gee, a labor shortage, a tight labor market is good.
The immigration flow is very important to this economy, there's no question about that. Having said that, what's wrong with the immigration flow that we're experiencing today, that it's heavily weighted toward the unskilled and poorly educated and people who are already having a difficult time in our economy and are likely to do so as well into the next century, and insufficiently high proportion of these are in the highly skilled categories and educated categories.
And your view is that if you brought in a more skilled group of immigrants, that would change the balance of highly skilled to low skilled, and it would help the lower skilled.
Well, I think the issue is whether or not you, let's take the factory that's going to have its workforce retire, whether or not maybe that's some of the good news for the workers who graduated high school and couldn't get in those jobs. Can those workers be recruited from the hardware stores and retail stores where they're working to become factory workers? Or do we need to recruit foreign trained engineers because we don't have domestically trained engineers? I think in some sense immigration policy is best thought of in not just a labor market framework. I mean, I think
we don't think about it all in that sense. That's one of the problems today. Nobody thinks about immigration in that context whatsoever. We think our immigration policy is formed, to the extent that it's formed at all, by considerations that are totally divorced from workforce considerations.
Well, I clearly think workforce considerations ought to be factored into labor market policy. I mean, into immigration policies. They always have. We've had periods when we've recruited farm workers from Mexico because agricultural business wanted low-wage labor. We've had periods when we've recruited doctors from other countries because we've had a shortage of doctors willing to work in underserved areas. And so I think we've done both kinds of things before. All I'm saying is I think one can focus separately on the labor market issues facing American workers, which are much the same in metro areas like Detroit, where immigration is relatively small, than they are in other areas where immigration and competition of low-skilled workers is relatively large. It's a matter of degree, not kind.
I'm saying that we would be better off as a nation if we were able to attract to this, well, it's not a matter of attracting, admitting to this country a larger proportion of highly skilled, educated people out there. Similar to the Canadians. The Canadians have a point system. You live in Michigan, perhaps you know about this. I was once a Canadian immigrant, one is required.
You were born in Canada?
No, I was born in the States, but I taught at the University of Toronto for years.
Oh, I see.
And to do that, I had to become a Canadian immigrant, and you're required to fill out an application. Naturally, but they score you on basis of education, training, skills, even money, etc. I would favor something like that.
All I'm saying is that in a global economy, the immigration issue is not central to the labor market issue. If one is Microsoft or any large company, one can either decide to invest in engineers and facilities outside of Cambridge, England,
Exactly.
outside of the Sorbonne, anywhere else,
No
so
question.
that you can carry on your business anywhere in the world relatively easily. I mean, particularly with...
And you can hire them outside of Bombay, and they don't have to come to the United States. They just use the internet, and they say,
Right, that's my point.
Here's the new software
They can do all
thing,
those
you know.
things. They can all those things. But if you talk to people at Intel and at Microsoft, they are now finding themselves running out of the available supply of software and hardware engineers in their regions. And so one of the reasons why they're relocating abroad is not because, well, just because they can find the labor over there.
But the contradiction, Dick, about this is, if that's the case, then there ought to be a lot of incentives now for American college students to go into that direction.
There are.
In the short run, Microsoft can open up facilities in India or elsewhere. There are incentives. If the market works, then more American college students will go into this, and we'll be able to fill the shortage there with American workers who are getting reskilled. And there's no one, maybe this is another reason why there's less inflationary pressure, because you don't have to raise the wage of U.S. computer workers to attract more of them. If you can link everybody up very cheaply with the internet and a computer, then you've got a worldwide market from which you can meet your current labor shortage without necessarily bringing people in. I don't want to give the impression that I'm pro or anti-immigration on this. I'm just saying that the incentives which make skills shortages are the ones which lead students here to choose certain careers. And so if you want more students to go into careers, then having a labor shortage here and having companies go to campus and say, these are the kinds of people we want, is a good way to get that supply response from U.S. students.
How much of the problem in recent years has the labor and poverty situation been linked not to the economy generally, but to a breakdown of personal responsibility? You had high out-of-wedlock birth rates, which automatically create a lot of poverty. You have a lot of tales, both anecdotal and I think in terms of a variety of studies of people saying basically they don't want to work. Do we require to make this whole golden economy idea, do we have to change the values of this country or parts of this country?
I think most of the unemployed want to work, and a lot of the people out of the labor force want to work. I think the anecdotal stories often take on much more quantitative significance. There are clearly people who are out there who don't want to work. I'm much more concerned about somebody who wants to work, who was an average to mediocre student, who let's say, made a mistake and wasn't responsible when they were in school. They're now in their 20s. They can't find an employer who will hire them because the employer is looking for people with more skills and experience. So I think tight labor markets are their best shot, and that chances for people to get trained and retrained are also an important part of the picture.
Values?
Dysfunctional families are the enemy of the kids. Kids don't grow up with the right kinds of values. They don't grow up, they watch too much television, whatever the case may be. They don't grow up respecting education skills, and they become kids or adults in their 20s or in their 30s without these skills. So anything that can be done to restore the integrity of the family and a sense of responsibility is much to be desired.
Okay, I'm going to let you all off with an easy question. This is 1997. If you add 15 to 1997, you get the year 2013, 2012. Is that right? Yeah, 2012. Yes. What is going to happen? What is this labor force and this economy in America going to look like in the year 2012? What's it going to look like in the Midwest? What's it going to look like in America? I'll let you go first, that easy question.
Right.
And you can wrap it up, Sheldon.
All right. I think that we're always at a juncture, but I think that there are two scenarios. One of them is a very pessimistic one, which might be we're well on our way to having in place by then, where we have very much a bifurcated society, the kind of one that Sheldon's concerned about. I'm concerned about it as well, where you have an elite set of well-educated and highly paid, earning professionals and technical and managerial personnel in the economy, and you have a very large mass of people who haven't the skills and are poorly paid. They may be employed, but they aren't being paid well. That I think is the most frightening type of a scenario, with the middle having pretty well been cleaned out. The other one is that we have restored a sensible balance between those people who are well-educated and skilled and able to fill these high productivity, high-paying jobs, and diminish the proportion of our workforce that is low-skilled, and therefore, by doing so, increase their earnings.
Now, your job is to tell me which of those you think is going to happen. That was my question.
That's your job. Well, I just wanted to tell you what are our choices.
I understand. I appreciate that.
We'll be in between someplace, obviously, and I'm afraid, frankly, that we will not get around to curing the problems of our education training system. Much less will we get around to improving the family values that you and I are both concerned about.
Well, I think we agree because, again, I think the scenarios are right, and the extreme gloom scenario is not likely to happen. And I think the extreme optimistic scenario is not likely to happen. I think if things do veer off in a too negative direction, they're still a democratic society, and we're likely to get some self-correcting forces. So what I see is the great rise in inequality that we've been through seems to have been over, and is being alleviated by this current labor shortage, tight economy. And if we can keep on this keel where taxpayers will begin to feel they are more stable and have some resources, we might then be willing to spend the government resources it takes to provide opportunities.
Thank you very much, Dick Judy.
Thanks very much. I appreciate the chance to be here.
And thank you, Sheldon Danziger.
Thank you.
And thank you. For Think Tank, I'm Ben Wattenberg.
We at Think Tank depend on your views to make our show better. Please send your questions and comments to New River Media, 1150 17th Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. 20036. Or email us at thinktank@pbs.org. To learn more about Think Tank, visit PBS online at www.pbs.org. And please let us know where you watch Think Tank.
This has been a production of BJW Incorporated in association with New River Media, which are solely responsible for its content.